Hello. Today I thought we'd have a look at pattern design and pattern creation. So firstly, what is a pattern? Well, a pattern is simply a regularity that occurs in the natural or man-made and constructed world. Patterns are incredibly useful for designers. They allow us to design a small element that can be repeated over and over again. If you think about wallpaper as an example, somebody hasn't sat there and drawn and created this gigantic space. And in fact, every space that you wallpaper is likely to be different. So what we're trying to do is design a rule, design an element that you can repeat over and over again. And we're going to refer to this as a tile. Here is quite a good example of a simple pattern. We can see very clearly how this is made up of tiles. We can even see the little bit of grouting around the outside. It really shows very clearly these sort of lines of symmetry. And what we're going to be doing today is looking to design a tile that you can repeat multiple times to create the pattern. Here is a much more complex version of a tile. It's much harder to see how this would be able to reflect and join up to make a larger pattern, but it would. Instead of everything being confined within the tile, what you can see here if you look very closely is that actually there are elements which overlap the edges of the tile. So when it's expanded and made into a pattern, you can't see the lines like on the previous example where the grout was, because there's pattern which is overlapping those areas. Now you can create a pattern from anything. We're going to be working in Photoshop today to create your pattern, but I've just selected some kind of sketches that I've just borrowed from the internet to give you an example. I'm going to just use these because firstly they're black and white and they're a similar scale. And it's really useful when you're starting to create patterns to start with quite simple things. So you're just thinking about positioning and scale and tone. Each of these images that I've got on my screen here on this page, they're all of a similar size. None are particularly darker or lighter than others. They're all quite evenly weighted. And that's quite important to think about when you're creating a pattern design, because you don't want one single element to stand out much more than the rest, or else the pattern will look very obvious and you'll be able to see where the tile is very clearly if we had one bright leaf, for example. So to start, I'm just going to go up to the top of my screen and go to File and New. And we're just going to create a square document. And it's important to think about the size of your tile and the size in which you want to apply it to. So if I just go to centimeters, I might just make a document which is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. So obviously square to begin with. If you're obviously trying to create a billboard, for example, which might be 10 meters wide, you may only want, 4 tiles along the bottom, in which case you're going to need to make each of your pages 2 meters wide, each of your tiles 2 meters wide. But for this would be perfect for creating a pattern to fit on an A3 page that you can print out, put into your project. It's better to work smaller, especially if you're working with high resolution imagery, because it will be quite labor intensive the larger the document you create. But 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters for this is perfectly fine. So I'm just going to click Create. Now all I want to do is go back to this page and start bringing some of these shapes through. Now this is nice and easy because I've got a nice white page around the background. If you photographed a page of drawings, for example, and areas are dark, it's worth going in and lightening them up before you do hand. So I'm just going to start pasting some of these in. The nice thing about working from a white background is we also don't need to worry about where these shapes overlap. So I'm just using my polygonal lasso now, just so I can get in there and bring some of these other shapes through. Copy. And get this oak leaf as well. And I might just start with just 3 different elements to begin with, and start positioning them around your page. So I'm going to start scaling them up. You obviously don't want to scale things up too much so that they become pixelated. Like so. Now what I might do is create some duplicates of each of them. So I'll pull this one down. Just pressing the Option key or the Alt key on your keyboard and creating some duplicates of each of these. And I might kind of rotate them and place them at different angles. Next, you just want to go to your Layers tab over here and select all of your layers. So just pressing the Shift key, selecting all of them, and I'm just going to set them to multiply. This, as you can see, all of these objects overlap now. So it means that the kind of white boundary box that we've got around them isn't going to be going over the top of other objects, and we can push them really close to one another. You may even want them to overlap in places. So now I'm just going to adjust my orientation of some of them. So we've got a couple of each of the different objects, and it is really useful to use multiples of the same thing over and over again, because it does help deceive the viewer of where the tile is and where the pattern, where the kind of edges are of the tile in the pattern. So I'm fairly happy with this now. I just want to move some of these further apart so they're not right next to each other, the same shape. So I might do something like that. Really try and mix them up, get things as far away from each other as possible. Now obviously you can see things are a bit cramped up on here, and that's fine because we are going to continue moving things around. If I made this into my tile, for example, as it is, you know, when we create the overall pattern, you will get these really distinct kind of white areas because all of our objects are in the center of this. And actually, it's these lines, these edges, that you really want to try and disguise because they'll make it very obvious where the pattern is. So to do that, all we're going to do is try and wrap these shapes, these objects, over some of the edges so they're cropped off. Obviously, if I created a pattern from this and I've got all of this area cropped off here, you're going to get leaves which are sliced in half, which is not going to be ideal. So to do this, we're going to offset them so that they actually go out the top and maybe come in the bottom. So to do this, the first thing you must do is just right click on your layer of the object that you want to wrap and go to Convert to Smart Object. And you'll see you'll get a little icon in the bottom there. If it already is a smart object and you brought it in from Illustrator, for example, it is still worth doing this again. If you don't do this, it doesn't work perfectly and you get glitches. Next, you want to go to the top of your screen where it says Filter, go to Other, and down to Offset. So Filter, Other, Offset. And you can automatically see it's jumped, it's positioning. It's not terribly easy, but you've got to use these slide bars to change its position. So I might place it there and I might move it up a little bit. And you'll see now it should start coming in the bottom. It's worth just checking that it's doing this perfectly. So when you just nudge the top out, you just get the top through in the bottom there. So I might position that one something like that. Once you've done that, that layer needs to stay where it is. Be very careful not to move that layer or else you'll have a problem when it comes to creating the pattern. Next, I might choose one more object that I want to kind of wrap slightly around. So I might take this sort of maple leaf here and do the same there. So right click, Convert to Smart Object, and just check that's happened. Filter, Other, and Offset. Okay, going to move that right slightly. And again, I don't want to do this one the same amount. You know, that's very much in line. So I might really push this one through. So something like that. Okay. And again, I've still got quite a lot of white edge here. So, oops. So I might just try moving potentially this leaf and just pushing that just off the edge there. So that layer. Convert to smart object, filter, other, offset. It does sort of remember your last settings. So I'm just going to get that to the height that I want it and then move it across just so it blurs those gaps slightly, like so. Now I'm going to try and arrange these my remaining objects so I just fill up the space so I'm not left with much white space. I've got these two objects here which are maybe a little bit close together, so I might see if maybe I can pull this shape out, pop this one in there. Again, you don't want two of the same objects right next to each other, or else those two similar things will become quite obvious when you look at it as a pattern. So where's that? And it's sometimes worth, when you're doing patterns with lots of layers, to start labeling them as well. So now I might scale this guy right down. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that. I feel there's, you know, mostly an even spacing around my objects. I've got fairly even white space. You know, if I was being particularly pernickety, I might even bring this one down and through the bottom slightly, because then that would fill up this area here potentially. But I'm just going to leave it for now, and you can have a play with some of those finer details. But it's really important you get a nice even composition wherever possible. Now, to create the pattern, the first thing we need to do is define this as our pattern. So to do that, you just go up to the top of your screen and go Edit and Define Pattern. Okay, you can give it a name, leaf pattern, click OK. Next, just go to File and New. Might go to Print and just select an A3 document. That would be the largest we can print if we're putting it in our portfolios. Landscape, and click Create. So this is the document we're going to apply the pattern onto. So taking the tile, make it into that pattern. First thing you're going to do is you're going to be doing this on your background layer. So where you've got the padlock on the background layer, you have to just click on that padlock to release it. What you'll notice now is you can then use some of these buttons along the bottom. Okay, so you see the FX button there, which is grayed out. You must press the padlock first. Then just go to FX and Pattern Overlay. So here is the pattern from the video earlier. Automatically comes up because it's the last one I used, and there's me just adjusting its scale. But if you see where you've got the image of the pattern there, this little drop down menu, this is where you've got a range of your patterns. So I'm going to click on this one, which are my drawings of my leaf. And you can then adjust the scale of it. So this one isn't too bad. Whilst it's obvious we can see that it is a pattern, it is something that's repeating, it's not terribly kind of abstract, it is still very difficult to work out where the tile is and where it isn't. So, you know, this would be quite a good example for something that be used in the fashion industry or for designing wrapping paper, for example. But adjust the scale to where you're happy with it. So I tend to prefer something around here potentially, maybe a little bit further out. And I'm just going to click OK. One thing a lot of people say is when you zoom in, it can look quite pixelated. to begin with, especially when you're working with quite high resolution things. If you want to see it as full resolution, all you need to do is just right click on your layers tab and go to flatten image, and you should see it render out. So if you're seeing it's a bit pixelated, you can just do that. And there you go, there's your first pattern. I might just quickly undo that and just show you some other ones that I had a quick play around with. So pattern overlay. Instead of this one, I tried one of my ink prints as well. That's where I took a print for some leaves. I arranged this same shape over and over again, made a tile, and so I've created a pattern from that. So you might give that a go. Try it with different forms, different shapes, and see how you can create a range of different patterns. All right, best of luck. I look forward to seeing what you come up with, and we'll look at some more advanced pattern skills next time.